Yes, we are now.
All right, gentlemen, we have everybody present. We're now live. Take a motion to go out of executive session into public session.
So moved.
Moved by Jazinski, seconded by Bauer. We have everybody present. Excuse me. Commissioner Jazinski,
Yes, aye.
Commissioner Persinger,
Aye.
Commissioner Stevens,
Aye.
Commissioner Bauer,
Aye.
and Mayor Commissioner Cook says aye. We're now in public session. How about we all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
Aye.
of the United States of America and to
To
the republic
which it stands,
one nation,
one nation,
Under God.
under God.
justice for all.
Liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. If we just have one short moment of silence for all the people out there, all the first responders out there that are keeping all of us safe. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. Roll call, Commissioner Persinger,
Here.
Commissioner Jazinski,
Here.
Commissioner Stevens,
Here.
Commissioner Bauer,
Here.
and we also have present our town manager, Jim Dedes, and our town attorney, Fred Townsend, and our town clerk, Ashley, the last name again,
Sander.
Sanders. Sorry,
Plural, just singular. Sander.
Sander. No S on the end, right? Okay.
Correct.
The beach is filled with what, Dale? Sand.
I'll take a motion to adopt the agenda.
Motion.
Motion by Paul
Second.
Bauer to adopt the agenda, seconded by
Second.
Mr. Stevens.
Mr. President.
Mr. Persinger, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Jazinski,
Aye.
Mr. Stevens,
Aye.
Mr. Bauer,
Aye.
and I myself, Mr. Cook, votes aye, unanimous. We've had the roll call, we've had the pledge, we've had the adoption of the agenda. Ms. Sander, is there anybody want public comment?
Not at this time.
Not at this time, okay. And we'll have, any commissioners have any present announcements or updates they'd like to say? Hearing none, we'll move on. Item number 1 for discussion, possibly vote to approve contract to hire a new town manager. Is there, from Mr. Bauer,
Motion
motion to,
Second. Oh. Good.
to hire our new town manager.
Mr. Carl William Zolper, Zolper. Mr. Stevens, you seconded?
Yes, I'd like to second the motion
All right.
to approve the hire of Carl Williams Zolper.
Is there any further discussion on the matter? Hearing none, I'll go to the roll call vote. Mr. Persinger,
I vote aye.
Mr. Jazinski,
Aye.
Mr. Stevens,
Aye.
Mr. Bauer,
Aye.
and myself, Mr. Cook, aye, unanimous to vote. And we welcome Mr. Zolper, as the new town manager, effective February 1st. And I'll get with the town attorney to finish off the signings of the contract, et cetera. The second item on the agenda is discuss and possibly vote to approve the supplement to the Town of Dewey Beach Street and Beach Maintenance Agreement with the Delaware Department of Transportation. And I would ask our interim town manager, Mr. Dedes, to explain.
Thank you. As you recall, we've had discussions in the past regarding the beach lands. And there's been some issue or basically a disagreement between us and the state. Our position has been is we have some authority, if not control, of the beach lands. And that's really the area that goes to the end of the pavement on the ocean side of all the streets. And it goes out towards the dunes. their position is that they feel that they have total control. Consequently, I sent a draft agreement and an explanation over to DelDOT. They in turn sent it to their attorneys, and they came up with the, I guess it's the agreement that you'll have before you. And basically it clarifies that and gives us authority over the beach land area, which from us, it goes out 8 feet towards the east and in both directions, the east and the west. This allows us to have some more control over potentially what it can be placed and what can be done on those areas. And it would involve having anybody who wants to provide some sort of a structure or anything, we would have the ability to take a look at that and issue permits or not, depending on the structure and what authority they may have to put one on there. We discussed this with our attorney, and Fred made some modifications to the original agreement that I proposed. And Fred, you may want to weigh in on your thoughts on this as well.
Thank
Go ahead,
you.
Mr. Townsend.
Thank you. The original agreement was executed in 1984, and the purpose of it was to give Dewey Beach the authority to govern the rights of way that are essentially state-owned. And it has been amended on one occasion previously, and now is being amended again with your consent for the purpose of defining the beach lands that are referenced in the 1984 agreement, but aren't really defined well at all. So what this effort is accomplishing is better defining the rights of way and where they are distinguished from the beach lands and what authorities belong to which entity with regard to those two different areas. So previously there was just a reference to beach lands and a reference to the right of way. We are defining the right of way to be the 8 feet that end or 8 feet beyond the end of the paved surface on the east side of roads that abut the ocean. And everything else is beach lands to the east. And that's important. It's important for all parties to understand where those lines are, so we can establish who's responsible for governing those areas.
So, Mr. Townsend, as I understand, I'll go to, after I finish, I'll go to Mr. Bauer, and then Mr. Stevens had his hands up also. I understand it that from the end of the pavement on the east end of the streets that end at the dunes, 8 feet out from the end of that pavement will now be controlled by the town of Dewey Beach.
Well, under the agreement, Dewey Beach has authority over the rights of way that are state-owned. And those rights of ways are considered associated with the roads. Then additionally, there are areas referred to in the 1984 agreement as beach lands.
Right.
And in that case, the state is authorizing us to have exclusive authority, so long as the public rights to come and go and to make public use of the property remain intact, as referenced in the 1984 agreement. So,
All right. Mr. Bauer, then Mr. Stevens, then Mr. Jazinski. Mr. Bauer.
I was just going to make a motion to approve this. Don't we have to have a motion on the floor to discuss it?
Yes, that's basically correct. Motion to approve the agreement. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Stevens, second. Mr. Jazinski, do you want to start the conversation off, please?
Sure. So Fred, I wanted to verify a couple of things. So the amount of control we have for the beach lands by this agreement is obviously increased. The amount of control we have over the state right-of-way stays the same as it's been. But then the third thing I wanted to make sure is that this doesn't in any way dilute the responsibility of the state towards beach nourishment, dune maintenance, or anything like that.
Well, it certainly doesn't speak to that. The language, so that's a good question, but the language refers to jurisdiction. Which is establishing, let's see, beach lands currently within the control and jurisdiction of the state of Delaware shall from this date forward be under the jurisdiction of the town. So the agreement is silent on beach replenishment. I'm very comfortable saying that neither of the parties mean to interfere with the state's ongoing efforts to replenish the beaches from time to time. I can't say I know exactly what the state relies on for the purpose of conducting their beach replenishment. I know it's not this agreement, obviously. This agreement is an agreement between us and us, the town, and the state, and it's regarding street and beach maintenance. But other than to acknowledge that this agreement is silent on that, I'm not sure how to answer your question. I certainly wouldn't believe that this has any effect on the beach replenishment efforts, which are so very important, not just to the town, but to the state as well.
Well, could I ask Mr. Jazinski, does that address it as much as can be addressed at this time?
I think that's all he can say. I don't, because as he pointed out, it's silent on it. I wouldn't want us to be in a situation, I'm not suggesting we would, where the state at some point says, well, you signed this agreement, so it's not our responsibility anymore, right? I just wouldn't want to be in that kind of position.
Well,
Gotcha.
then I can propose if that's a concern that we ask the group whether we're comfortable with the balance of the terms of the agreement, and then perhaps we could seek to amend it with some reference and authorize the mayor to sign it with some reference addressing the issue of the beach replenishment.
Yeah, Mr. Stevens, I apologize, I skipped over you.
It's
Go ahead and
okay.
Make your comment.
Yeah, I have a few different comments, so bear with me. One, Fred, this will be an amendment to the street and beach maintenance agreement signed in 1984, correct?
Right.
That agreement particularly pertains to the streets itself, as well as access to those streets. It has nothing to do with beach replenishment. So I think Commissioner Jazinski's point is that there are two separate divisions. This is with the Division of Highways and Transportation. The second comment that I have is I want a clarification on something that Mr. Dede said. Mr. Dede, you had commented that this is, and it's just visually, that this is 8 feet from the end of the pavement. You said east and west. Does that mean that we have a 16? Did I hear that correctly? That it's from the 8 feet towards the east and 8 feet towards the west, that we have some level of control of what would happen?
That's the way I'm reading it, and I think that was the intent together. But I'm looking at this, and the way it's written and it's drafted, it's 8. It just takes it to the 8 feet at the end of the street.
So we have from the end of pavement, the 8 feet until the path to the dune start. Is that correct?
8 feet towards the dune.
Towards the
From the end
dune,
of the-
and that's
so
the
just
limit
that
of
8 feet.
control. Yeah, and that's the limit of control we would have. That's all this does. It doesn't go into DENREC's authority at all.
Mhm.
This is strictly
Okay.
an agreement between us and DelDOT.
Well, that clarifies my question then.
Okay.
If it's only
Anything
Bill-
else, Mr. Stevens? Anything
Yeah,
else?
when I was reading this agreement, obviously the concern at the time that this was written, what has to do with the beach, access to the beach, who's taking care of the roads at the end of the streets and potential, but we don't necessarily address the bay. And I'm just looking down the road of a potential issue of those streets that also end in the bay. Has that had any consideration in terms of those controls? Not that they're DelDOT or not that the I can foreseeably see an issue, but it would be consistent for us to consider, for example, the end of Reed or the end of Dagsworthy, if it's consistent with this language. So I just wanted to ask Fred if that was a consideration at all, and also put that out to the other commissioners.
Is that to Mr. Dedes or Mr. Townsend?
Mr. Townsend.
So the need to refer to this definition of beach lands and to establish who has authority over what areas, of course, was brought about in the context of the 5G efforts that are ongoing. So from a practical point of view, I don't think there's any current evidence that there are carriers who would like to locate any facilities on the bay side of the existing right of way. So I mean, beyond the streets, I don't think that there's any pressure right now to regulate those areas. If we do, we've got to call them something other than beach lands, which are referred to again in the 1984 agreement, because they are,
Fair enough.
yeah, they don't meet that definition.
Okay,
The
I have
original-
Mr. Persinger first and then Mr. Bauer.
Yeah, I just want to make clear or see if we can be clear exactly what we mean by beach lands, because the discussion there did not seem clear to me. You know, as I just want to make sure that I understand it as well as everyone else does. If you stood at the end of the pavement on any given street facing the ocean, and you walked out 8 feet toward the ocean from the edge of that pavement, all the land from that point out to the ocean is beach land. And that is what the town would, that thus has jurisdiction over.
No,
Well, that's the way it reads, as I believe. What this new amendment does, I believe, is basically clarify what beach lands are. I think the town was already given jurisdiction over the beach lands, as I read it, in the 1984 agreement, but it was not very well defined. And so now in this new agreement, you know, it says, for purposes of the agreement, beach lands shall be defined as areas bounded to the east by the Atlantic Ocean. So that's one boundary, and bounded to the west, coming back toward the bay, by a line established 8 feet beyond the easternmost edge of the paved travelways of the streets identified on Exhibit A. That's each individually named street. So again, as I read this, stand at the edge of the pavement facing the ocean, walk forward toward the ocean 8 feet. From that point forward out to the ocean, that is the definition of beach lands.
I'm not reading the agreement now, but the intent of this was to have from the end of the pavement, 8 feet towards the dunes, be considered under town jurisdiction and not the rest of the beach land.
That's
Mr.
not the way
Dedes,
I read it.
Mr. Dedes, am I correct?
that's the way I believe it was written. The fact that we mark 8 feet limits it.
I'm sorry, who did I say was next?
I'd like to get the town attorney's view on this.
Okay. Well, I wasn't going to skip over you. I was just trying to see if I jumped over somebody else first, but Mr. Townsend, go ahead.
Okay, so as I understand it, the state has entered into an agreement with us to give us the authority to govern the streets, essentially, the right-of-way surrounding the streets. That was the 1984 agreement, and it also referenced the beach lands, but it didn't define the beach lands very well for us. So we didn't know where the beach lands started and where the streets ended. We have jurisdiction under the 1984 agreement for regulating what takes place in the rights-of-way already. But where do the rights-of-way end and the beach lands begin? Well, it wasn't important in 1984 because our authority on those areas as well as the streets was the same. But pursuant to this amendment, the DelDOT, the state of Delaware, are proposing to authorize us to have exclusive jurisdiction over the beach lands, but not exclusive jurisdiction over the rights of way. So that's why we're making this distinction. The rights of way we will continue to regulate, but the state of Delaware is claiming they still have the right to hear, for instance, applications for the locating of facilities supporting 5G. But with regard to areas 8 feet beyond the end of the pavement and east, they won't hear those. They won't hear any applications for that. They're going to refer to us pursuant to this agreement and for any other related matters. So what this does is it's like circling the right of way around the streets. And it's evidencing that the right of way around the streets is an 8-foot area beyond the pavement of all the streets. What's left to the east is the beachlands, and that's where we have exclusive authority.
Mr. Persinger, does that answer your question?
Well, I believe what he just said is what I read in the document, but that's not what I've heard others say. I don't see any additional jurisdiction here in terms of right of way. I mean, again, you're moving 8 feet out from the edge of the street, and from that point forward out to the ocean, those are defined as beachlands. And that is the area over which we would have sole jurisdiction. That's what the language says to me.
Mr. Dedes, if I could interrupt for a minute, the intent of this was to give jurisdiction to the town from a point starting at the end of the paved road, 8 feet towards the dunes. Is that correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Persinger is saying what is written does not say that it says all the way out to the ocean.
And
Mr. Townsend.
may I make a comment?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Dedes.
The DelDOT does not have authority over the DENREC authority covering the beachlands. Their authority only goes 8 feet out beyond
There we
the
go.
roadway.
Mhm.
They can't circumvent DENREC's authority.
So you're saying DelDOT could not give us part of the beach that belongs to DENREC anyway?
Yeah, it's not
So-
theirs to give.
Right. Mr. Townsend, comment?
No, that's a coming at it from the opposite angle, but that's saying the correct thing. That that what we're doing is defining the limits of the right of way by defining the beachlands. So we've now, for the first time, can establish that DelDOT doesn't have any jurisdiction beyond the end of the right of way, which is 8 feet from the paved streets.
Mr. Persinger, does that,
Well, so therefore this amendment does not give us any additional authority over that 8-foot space beyond the edge of the pavement.
Well,
There's nothing here.
Right.
it
That's
limits DelDOT's authority by defining where it comes to an end.
I'm gonna go on to Mr. Bauer. You had your hand up. Did anybody else originally have their hand up other than Mr. Bauer? I don't want to jump ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Bauer.
Just a clarification. Fred, you had mentioned something about we need to use a different term for beachlands on the bay.
Well,
Can I just say that we want to stick with the discussion here of what this agreement would give us right away on the ocean, not on the bay.
Right. So that's what I'm thinking is if we need to craft a second document, we can put that on an agenda for another meeting.
Are you proposing that we table this?
No, I'd like to vote on getting this beachlands one done now. And let's, perhaps talk about what we need to do on the bay side as well. In another meeting that we didn't notice it for today, so we're not.
That's
talking about
correct.
it today.
That's correct. Is there Any other further comments?
Yeah,
Mr.
I don't,
Wait a minute, hold on one second. Mr. Jazinski, then Mr. Persinger.
So-
Mr. Jazinski.
Commissioner Persinger, you're talking a lot about this 8 feet from the edge of the roadway. Do you have a concern that you want us to have more authority from the edge of the roadway to where that 8-foot mark is? Is that where this is coming from?
I'm just trying to understand what it is we're accomplishing by signing off on this. I mean, I don't see anything in here that gives us any additional authority over that 8-foot space between the edge of the roadway and the line that begins to define beachlands.
Mr. Jazinski, does that answer your question?
Well, it clearly does something for us at the area beyond 8 feet from the roadway. But the issue is we're not getting additional authority within those 8 feet from 8 feet into the beach walk to the road. We're not getting any additional authority there.
Mhm. That's correct.
And I'm asking you, is that what your stumbling block is, that you want us to have more authority in that 8-foot space?
I'm not arguing that we have any more authority. I'm just trying to understand, get a clear understanding among all of us, what additional authority, if any, that we are getting here.
Let me give an example, and Fred, you tell me if I'm off base here. I think what this gives us is, let's say at the end of a street, you have a long walkway onto the beach till you get to the beach proper. And let's say somebody wants to do something 20 feet into that walkway, because the walkway is 100 feet long, and they want to do something and they want to get a permit to do something. Rather than that being under DelDOT's jurisdiction jointly with us, it'll now just be under our sole jurisdiction. Is that correct, Fred?
That is correct. Remember, the original 1984 agreement referred to the right-of-way and beachlands. So we're giving meaning to what that reference to beachlands is. But you're right, Commissioner Jasinski, that would be correct. DelDOT wouldn't be able to say, because of the existence of the 1984 agreement, we're acknowledging our authority over the beachlands.
Mr. Persinger.
I understand that. The 1984 agreement did give us authority over the beachlands, jurisdiction over the beachlands, but it didn't define it very well.
Mhm.
There was some confusion there. So this amendment does define it, but it does not give us any additional authority over the 8-foot right-of-way section at the end of the street. There was discussion earlier where I heard people saying they thought this agreement did give us some additional authority or some additional jurisdiction. I don't see that it does, and that's just what I'm trying to get a clear understanding of.
Mr. Dedes, you had your hand up.
Yes, when I talked to Mr. Sema regarding this issue, which references exactly what Mr. Persinger has brought up, the DelDOT's attorneys felt they had complete control of that 8-foot section, not us. That was the disagreement we had. We felt we did, they felt they did, and they felt that their argument would supersede our argument.
Mr. Dedes, you're talking about the 8-foot from the end of the,
That's exactly right.
okay.
So, I mean, we can assume we had authority. If we had authority, they wouldn't have been able to immediately approve permits for various structures to go on there. They would have had to go to us first. They didn't. They chose to do it themselves because they felt they had the authority and the wherewithal to approve those current poles, and that's what I'm talking about. So they didn't have to even discuss this with us, and they didn't. This clarifies what I think our authority was intended to be from the beginning. That's my assumption. And it didn't extend it beyond the 8 feet because that was never the agreement, the original agreement.
Mr. Townsend, you initially asked to be, and then Mr. Persinger.
Yeah. What Mr. Dedes just said is correct, as I understand it. And to Mr. Persinger's point, regarding the area beyond the 8 feet, our jurisdiction is arguably enhanced because DelDOT is conceding that they have no jurisdiction. But as far as giving us additional powers with respect to DNREC, you're right, we're not getting any additional jurisdiction. We're just removing DelDOT from the picture once you get 8 feet beyond the end of the streets.
Mr. Persinger, hold on one second. I'm going to go back to you just for a second. But Mr. Townsend and Mr. Dede, our understanding was that we were gaining authority over, gaining jurisdiction over the area 8 feet eastward from the end of the roadway. You know, we're starting at the end of the roadway, go 8 feet eastward and stop right before the dunes. That area is this, that's what I understood. It was to give us extra authority over that area. In other words, 8 feet towards the road from the dunes. Mr. Persinger is saying that that's not what this agreement said. And that's what was my intention when I worked with it with Mr. Dede. Mr. Dede, is that, wasn't that our intention to gain?
Absolutely, absolutely. Our intention was never to take it beyond the 8-foot section because we don't control it. That's a DENREC issue.
Right. Mr.
So
Townsend,
that would be a
comment?
separate agreement with DENREC if that's what the town wanted to enter into.
Well, Mr. Cook, if I heard you correctly, I thought I heard you say that your intent in, or the intent of the town in pursuing this amendment to the agreement was to add to its authority in the area 8 feet beyond the paved streets. And I don't think that's
From the
accurate.
pavement, 8 feet eastward.
So we're not getting any additional authority from the pavement 8 feet eastward. What we're getting is exclusive authority beyond what we're defining as the right of way, which is the streets plus 8 feet.
With all due respect, sir, and Mr. Dede just verified it, that Mr. Persinger is correct then, that this authority, they're trying to give us authority, or it's written as if
No.
it gives us authority over something we don't want.
No, that's not what I said. What I said was our authority would be up to 8 feet past the roadway, no more.
Correct. That's what I'm saying, Jim.
Okay,
That's
No, I thought you
exactly
said
what I'm
that-
saying. And Mr.
Okay,
Townsend
I
is saying,
apologize.
Mr. Townsend is saying what we had before us would give us jurisdiction past that 8 feet out to the ocean water.
I don't
And
think
that's
so.
not what we desired. That was not the intent. Mr. Persinger, you have a comment on that?
Well, I think the town attorney has agreed with my interpretation here. If your intent was to get some additional authority over that 8-foot section, this agreement does not do that.
Right.
No.
And,
So, you know,
and we need to have a motion to table this agreement until we get it straight.
I think we can modify this agreement very easily and send it to them to review. And what we would do is just up to, and I see what you're saying, which is it would be up to 8 feet beyond the eastern, but it would limit it to 8 feet, period. I think that's the intent. I think that's what they put down, and they can't give us authority past what they've got authority.
That's correct. And they only have the authority up to that 8 foot right now.
And I think all we have to do is add a section established up to 8 feet
So,
or limit.
Mr. Townsend, what do you suggest at this time?
No, I think it needs to be tabled at this point, because I think we need to spend some time trying to clarify what DelDOT is willing to cede to us and what we're trying to accomplish, and see
Correct.
if the two interface.
Obviously, I've misread it too. Mr. Stevens, you had your hand up?
Yeah, because I think we're all coming around the same thing, and I agree with Mr. Dedes. I think this is a simple language clarification, because if DENREC has from the water's edge through the dunes up until right now DelDOT, where there's this gap, and what they're saying is that the 8 feet from the end of the pavement towards the dunes, which is where
That's
all those
correct.
poles have gone through, is still in DelDOT's control.
That's correct.
And they're saying we don't have control. We're relinquishing control. And the intent was of this amendment, the intent of this amendment was to allow us to preserve that 8 feet where current poles are being erected. So
That's correct.
I'm not sure why this doesn't, Fred, you're shaking your head.
Mhm.
What am I wrong on?
Well, I don't think, I mean, if you're interpreting this as DelDOT giving us some of their authority with respect to the rights of ways, then I think that would be a mistake. What this agreement does is it defines what the right of ways consist of. And it's defining it with respect to where it meets the beachlands as being 8 feet beyond the pavement. So 8
Are you
feet,
saying that's inconsistent with DenRec's perception of what they control in terms of the beach to the dunes? Because I think that was Mr. Persinger's issue.
it could be inconsistent. I don't know how DenRec's definition of the beachlands fit into this one. So-
Can I suggest again that that someone think about having a motion to table until we get it straight and then add it on to, not as part of the motion, but we would then add it on to the next meeting.
So moved. Motion to table.
I second.
There's motion to table in a second. Mr. Townsend, do I have to ask to vote on that? Or is it just,
Yes, you do.
Mr. Persinger, how do you vote?
I vote aye.
Mr. Stevens, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Jazinski, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Bauer, how do you vote? Mr. Bauer, your mic is off.
Aye.
And Mayor Commissioner Cook votes aye also. It's unanimous. It is tabled. We then move on to the next item, which is interim town manager comments. Mr. Didi, your comments?
No comment.
Mr. Bauer,
No comments.
Mr. Jazinski,
No comments.
Mr. Persinger,
Perhaps not a comment, but it's a question. Maybe you can't answer it now, but we have a special town meeting scheduled after the Budget and Finance Committee workshop. I'm just wondering if we could get some information about why we're doing that, what that meeting is about.
Okay.
That was just my question.
I will get that to you after this meeting. I apologize. I had probably 40 emails today, and I did see your email, and I did not answer it, and I apologize.
It's all right. It's okay.
Yeah. Mr. Stevens?
No comment.
No comment. And Mr. Cook, I believe we hit everybody else. Mr. Cook comments that we're welcoming a brand new town manager. I hope he will have everybody's cooperation, and I'm sure he will give his cooperation to everybody, and I'm sure he will be getting in touch with you all shortly. Any other comments for the good of the town? Motion to adjourn would be accepted.
Motion to adjourn.
Mr. Bauer,
Second.
Second.
second, Mr.